My name is Margaret Collins. I am 68 years old, and I live in Asheville, North Carolina. I have always been a practical woman. I am a retired biology teacher, passionate about science, numbers, and logic. I grew up in a non-religious home, and throughout my life, I have cultivated a certain pride in being too rational to believe in anything I could not see or prove. The word faith had never been part of my vocabulary. I thought humans created these ideas to deal with the fear of death, nothing more. But on that October 6th, something happened to me, something that would challenge everything I believed. It was a peaceful morning. I made my coffee black, as usual, and went for a walk in the park near my house. I remember looking up at the clear autumn sky and smiling slightly. But that was it, a moment of peace, before the collapse. Everything went blurry. The ground disappeared beneath my feet. I fell, hearing distant voices, running footsteps, an unbearable pain in my chest, sirens, screams, the sound of someone saying, "We lost her," then just emptiness. For a few seconds, or minutes, I don't know, everything was silent. It wasn't darkness. It was as if I had been torn from time. A total pause, like when you hold your breath underwater. Except there was no body. There was no fear. I died that day. At least my heart stopped for 4 minutes, according to the doctors. But what I saw, what I lived in that time, no one ever prepared me for. And it doesn't matter if you believe it or not, because I didn't believe it either, until it happened to me. It was like I was suspended. Nothing around me. No color, no sound. Just a strange sensation of being conscious, but without a body. No pain, no heat, no cold, just presence. And suddenly I was looking at myself. Yes, I saw my body stretched out on the stretcher, surrounded by doctors and nurses. They were in a frenzy. Someone was giving me cardiac massage, another was shouting commands, and a third was giving me an injection. The scene was frantic, but I observed everything with incredible calm, as if it wasn't about me. And at the same time, it was all about me. "She's not responding," someone shouted. But I had already left there. I began to rise. No wings, no momentum, just being carried. Like a leaf in the wind, but conscious, lucid, awake. The only thing I felt was an indescribable lightness, as if a weight of decades had been lifted from me. It was at that moment that I heard a voice. Not just any voice. It didn't come from outside. It didn't pass through my ears. It was inside me, all around me, as if the universe itself was whispering my name. Margaret. My heart, or whatever my essence was at that moment, shuddered. The voice was soft, but filled with something I'd never experienced before. Quiet authority. It was like the sound of something you didn't know you were missing until you heard it. "You are not alone." That sentence, spoken without haste, enveloped me like a hug. And with it, images came. Not like a dream, but like memories I never knew I had. The smell of my mother's lap when I was a baby, my first day of school, my sister hugging me at our father's funeral. All at the same time, as if someone was showing me my entire life from the outside. Then came the tunnel. The darkness around me began to open up into a space that felt alive, a corridor of shadows and light, and I was pulled into it without fear, only with a strange certainty that something much greater awaited me at the end. I, the woman who believed in nothing, was about to experience the impossible. It was as if the universe had stopped just for me. And there, in that moment outside of time, I entered something that I can only describe as a tunnel of living existence. It was neither dark nor light. It was pulsating, warm, but without heat. A corridor made of memories, forgotten sounds and smells that took me back to my childhood. As I walked through that space, I began to see images of my life flashing around me. Not like in a movie, but as if I were inside them again. I felt what I had felt as a child, a teenager, an adult. Every laugh, every pain, every choice, they were there, and there was no way to look away. I saw the time I yelled at my mom for no reason at 17. I felt the regret I'd hidden for decades. I saw the time I ignored that coworker who asked me for help, but I was too busy. I realized how much time I wasted on pride, judgment, and coldness. None of that felt wrong before. But now it said so much about who I was. And along with these scenes, I felt something I had never felt before. A presence watching me, not judging me, but crying for me. A deep, silent sadness, but full of love. And it broke me inside. I, Margaret Collins, a woman of science, rational and independent, began to cry with a pain that did not come from outside, but from within. A pain of someone who realizes, too late, that she has lived half her life on autopilot, without gratitude, without surrender, without faith. In the tunnel, time as we know it did not exist. Minutes felt like hours. And I understood that every choice I made, no matter how small, had created invisible ripples, those that touched people, drove others away, and even caused harm I never imagined. It was at this point that I realized I was being confronted with the truth of my soul. And then, something changed. The images began to fade, giving way to a glow at the end of the tunnel. A light that didn't hurt my eyes, but penetrated the deepest part of me. It called to me without words. It wasn't fear that I felt. It was something stronger, reverence. That light seemed to know every cell of my existence, and yet it accepted me. But before I reached it, I was pulled back by yet another memory, the last one. I, 13 years old, sat on the sidewalk, looking at the sky on a summer night. I remember exactly what I thought that day. If God exists, why doesn't he appear? And now, decades later, on that journey between worlds, with my entire life exposed, I was going to discover the answer. I was about to meet someone on the other side of that light, someone who would change everything. And that had been waiting for me for a long time. The light at the end of the tunnel wasn't just a light. She had presence. She had intelligence. She had love. A love that was not human. It was as if I was being enveloped by something that had always known me, even when I denied it with all my might. As I approached, I began to perceive a figure within the light. It did not walk, it did not speak, it did not move, but its mere existence made my spirit tremble and fall to its knees. And I knew without a doubt who it was. Not because someone had told me, not because I had seen it in books, but because my soul recognized it. It was Jesus. Yes. The same one that I spent my life saying was just a historical character. The same one that, for me, was a symbol of blind religiosity. The same one that I would make fun of when I saw someone speaking with faith. He was there, and he was looking at me. But his gaze was not human. It was as if Jesus' eyes contained the entirety of time in the universe. In them, I saw infinite compassion, gentle sadness, and a hope that I can't even describe. He didn't have to tell me anything. Yet, he spoke directly to my inner self. You spent your life trying to prove that I didn't exist, and yet, I was always with you. These words did not come with sound. They came with feeling, with memory, with truth. I remembered nights when I cried alone, thinking that no one cared. I remembered accidents that were avoided by seconds, of premonitions that saved me from the worst. And there, I understood. It was not a coincidence. It never was. Jesus did not judge me, but his gaze undressed me completely. You ran away from me because you thought I was going to punish you, but I just wanted to love you. I started crying like I had never cried in my life. The tears of my soul, of someone who realizes that they spent years denying the only source of true love that was always there, silent, waiting patiently. And it was in that cry that something inside me broke. I saw the child I was, who only wanted to be loved. I saw the woman hardened by trauma, by loss, by silence. And I saw, finally, the woman I could have been if I had known this love before. Then Jesus came closer. His light pierced me, but it didn't hurt. It was healing. It was transformation. You still have time, but you need to tell them what you saw. They need to know that I am real. I could barely respond, but with a subtle gesture, he touched my heart. And in that touch, I understood everything. His love doesn't need to be understood. It only needs to be accepted. And it was at that moment, when I finally surrendered, that everything began to change again. I was about to be returned. It wasn't the end yet. But now, I was someone else. The light surrounding Jesus began to pulse differently, as if preparing me for something deeper. He didn't take me to a physical place. It was as if we were in a real space where nothing could be hidden. It was then that Jesus reached out his hand, and my life opened before us like a living book. It wasn't just a replay of actions. I could feel the impact my every choice had on others, even the ones that, at the time, seemed insignificant. I saw the time I failed to call my sister when she needed me most. While I went about my day as normal, she cried alone in her room, feeling abandoned. And I never knew. I saw the doorman of the building where I had lived for 20 years. I always walked past him without so much as a good morning. I never knew he had lost his son. I never imagined that a simple gesture of kindness could have made a difference. But there, in that sacred space, I felt the pain he felt and the opportunity I had missed. Jesus didn't condemn me. He just let me feel what I had caused. And then came the question, not in words, but with a weight as real as the air itself. What did you do with the love you received? That shot through me like an arrow. It wasn't about religion. It wasn't about going to church or repeating cliches. It was about the love I had received throughout my life and what I had done with it. The excuses I used, the walls I built, the coldness I justified with logic and reason, all of that collapsed before him. I cried again, not out of fear, but out of regret. And for the first time in my life, I wished I had loved more. There, I understood something that changed everything. True judgment is not external. It happens within us, when we are faced with the truth of who we were. Jesus didn't show me my sins to shame me, but to give me a chance to start over. How many times in your life have you felt like you could have done things differently, but time passed? Tell me in the comments. This may open up new paths for you, and for those reading this as well. His presence began to move away, but not out of rejection. It was as if he was preparing me for something even more intense. Because before he could return, I needed to see the other side. The side of those who haven't found the light. Jesus didn't say anything else, but something inside me knew. The next part, I would have to see for myself. The light began to dissipate, as if it were letting me see what existed outside of it. I was taken to a place that didn't feel like heaven, and definitely didn't feel like earth. It was like a border between worlds, where the absence of God was palpable. The air, if I can call it that, was heavy. There was no fire, flames, monsters, or apocalyptic screams like in movies. It was much worse. It was complete emptiness, and in that void, there were people, spirits, souls, human beings like me, but lost. Some sitting, some lying down, many just wandering in silence, as if they didn't even know they were dead. And what shocked me the most, none of them were being punished. They were just living eternally with the consequences of their own choices. The loneliness there was suffocating. There was no communion, no light, no love. It was as if each one was locked inside his own pain, isolated from others and from himself. Each one trapped in an eternal echo of what he had rejected. A woman looked at me. Her eyes were empty, but I felt something, a silent plea, like someone who wanted to get out of there, but no longer knew how to ask for help. A sadness so deep that words couldn't reach it. I tried to talk to her. I wanted to ask her name, but there was no sound. I couldn't interfere. I could only see, feel, understand. These people were not thrown there. They chose this path, not with one act, but with a lifetime of closure, denial, pride, hatred, ego. It was not a punishment. It was the inevitable result of an existence cut off from the light. And that's when I understood why Jesus showed me that. You should have seen where the absence of love leads. I felt his presence again, even from a distance, as if he had never left me, but allowed me to feel what it was like to be without him. It was the most painful experience of the entire journey. Because now I knew that hell was not a place made by God to punish. It was a place made by the soul itself, by rejecting God to the end. I stayed there for an indeterminate amount of time. Maybe seconds, maybe hours. All I know is that when I was pulled back, I was no longer the same. I had seen the destiny of the human soul without love, without forgiveness, without light. And I understood. This story needed to be told. Because while there is life, there is a chance to choose. When Jesus' presence began to intensify around me again, it was like being rescued from an abyss. Not because I had been thrown into it, but because I saw what was on the other side of the light, and I came away transformed. He didn't look at me in a hurry. Jesus always seemed to have all the time in the world, and yet there was an urgency in the air, as if something important was about to happen. It was then that he spoke again, this time with clear words within my heart. "You saw it. Now you have to tell it." Those words sounded like a calling that had come from long before my existence. It was as if that mission had been written in me, even before my birth, and I was finally waking up to it. They need to know that I am real, that love is real, and that time is short. The last sentence struck me like a thunderclap. It wasn't a threat. It was a warning filled with compassion, a silent appeal. Because Jesus doesn't force or impose, he invites. But the invitation comes with responsibility. At that moment, I saw a scene that left a lasting impression on me. It was as if I were on top of a mountain, looking down at the world. Thousands, millions of people walking around, lost, in a hurry, eyes on their cell phones, hearts closed, souls empty. I saw young people destroying themselves because they didn't feel loved. I saw forgotten elderly people screaming inside. I saw families separated by pride. And I saw a deep spiritual silence, as if many had given up on searching. And among them, I saw people like me, skeptical, cold, full of answers, but empty inside. And I understood. They were being called too. They just didn't know it yet. Jesus then showed me scenes of what would happen if I went back and told everything. I saw people crying as they heard my testimony. I saw hearts opening. I saw reconciliations. I saw faith being reborn in dry souls. And I realized that my pain, my disbelief, my losses, they all had a purpose. You still have time. Come back and be a voice for those who have been silenced. I tried to protest, to say that no one would take me seriously, that they would think I was having a freak out, a dream. But Jesus just smiled. And in that smile, there was a love so deep that all my excuses fell apart. Truth recognizes those who have been touched by it. I said yes, not with words, but with my whole being. Yes, I would come back. Yes, I would talk. Yes, I would live differently. And that's when everything started to disappear. The light, the heat, the sound, time itself. It was as if I were being pulled back, forcefully, into something dense and limited, as if I were going to re-enter a body that no longer fit me. And then I woke up. The first thing I felt was a pain in my chest, a sharp pressure, as if something was forcing me back into a space that was too tight. Then came the sounds. Beeping, voices, footsteps, people running, and the cold, the sterile metallic cold of a hospital room. I opened my eyes. The white light of the ICU hurt, but not because it was bright. It hurt because it was so small compared to the light I had just seen. I heard someone say my name. "Margaret, are you listening to me?" It was a nurse, holding my hand tightly. There were doctors all around, and my sister Susan was in the corner, her face disfigured from crying. She's back. She's back. It took a few seconds for my mind to realize I was alive. My heart had stopped for 4 minutes. They were ready to give up. But somehow, I came back. And then, without thinking, without planning, I said, "I saw Jesus." The room froze. One of the doctors even laughed nervously. Susan went pale. The nurse looked at me as if she didn't know whether to call a psychiatrist or a priest. But I repeated, now with more force, "I saw Jesus. He is real. I was dead, and he told me to come back." That sentence seemed to echo inside me with more intensity than the voice itself. And for the first time in my life, I didn't care what they thought. This was more real than the white ceiling, more real than the machines around me. I wasn't dreaming. I knew. I spent 3 days in intensive care. Doctors called it a near-death experience. Some suggested hallucinations. But no one could explain how clearly I could describe details of the room during cardiac arrest, or how I could remember conversations that had taken place while my heart was stopped, or how I could repeat phrases that doctors had said, even though I had no physical consciousness at the time. But the strongest thing wasn't what I remembered. It was what I felt. I wasn't the same anymore. The food tasted different. My sister's touch felt more intense. The sound of the wind at night made me cry. It was as if the whole world had been painted over again. Only now I saw the colors that had always been there and that I had ignored before. Jesus gave me a second chance, and I knew I couldn't waste it. After 3 days in the ICU and another 5 in the hospital room, I was released. I returned home with a weak body, but a burning soul. Nothing seemed the same, and the truth is that nothing was the same anymore. The first place I stopped was not my bedroom. It was the garden at the back of the house. I sat on the wooden bench where I usually had my breakfast, always alone, always in silence, and I cried. I cried for the woman I was, for the arrogance, for the fear disguised as reason, for the times I closed my heart to others and to God. Little by little, I started changing simple things. I started calling people I hadn't spoken to in years. I asked my sister for forgiveness for having distanced myself from her after a silly argument. I called a former student who always sent me messages, and I never replied. I told him I remembered him, and that now I wanted to hear his story. But the most impressive thing happened the following Sunday. For the first time in over 40 years, I entered a church. Not out of pressure, not out of fear, but out of love. I sat in the back, shaking. Everything seemed strange to me. The music, the prayers, the closed eyes. But within a few minutes, I began to cry. Because there, among strangers, I felt that presence again. The same one that found me between worlds. Jesus was there. After the service, a white-haired lady approached me. She hugged me without saying anything. And in that hug, I knew he was beginning to use me. I began writing down everything I remembered about the NDE. I started a small online prayer group, even though I didn't know how to run one. And I told my story to everyone who would listen, and to many who didn't too. The reaction? It wasn't always easy. Some laughed. Others called me crazy, an impressionable old woman. Even my former teaching team, intelligent and dear people, suggested that I had had a neurochemical hallucination. But something inside me was now rock solid. I didn't need to convince anyone. I just needed to tell them. Jesus didn't ask me to debate. He asked me to witness. And so I went on, each day with more courage, each step with more faith. The skeptical woman died in that hospital. The one who came back had a mission. It was on a Thursday afternoon that I received the invitation. The small church I had started attending, right there in Asheville, was organizing a meeting for women over 60. They wanted someone to tell a story of overcoming difficulties. My story. My first impulse was to say no. I thought, who am I to say anything? They'll think I've completely lost my mind. But that same presence, soft, insistent, reminded me of the mission. Tell me what you saw. The following Saturday, I entered the chapel through the side door with a huge piece of paper in my hands. There were about 40 women sitting on simple wooden chairs. Most of them had gray hair, attentive eyes, and hearts marked by many decades of life. I stepped up onto the small altar, holding the microphone with both hands. And for a second, I went blank. But then, I took a deep breath and closed my eyes. I began to tell of the collapse in the park, of the siren, of the void, of the tunnel, of the light, of the presence of Jesus, of the look that pierced me, of the mission, of the touch. Little by little, the words flowed not like a lecture, but like a confession of the soul. And it was when I got to the part of the lost souls, the dark and cold place where I saw those who rejected love, that my voice failed. I held back the tears as best I could, but it was no use. They came down, slowly, and then, harder. The paper fell from my hand. It no longer mattered what I had written. These women were not there to hear a pretty story. They were there to feel the truth. And the truth is, I wasn't just Margaret Collins anymore. I was someone who had died and come back to warn. When I finished, there was silence. No one stood up. No one clapped. But almost everyone was crying. A lady approached slowly. She looked into my eyes and with a choked voice said, "I asked for a sign last night, and you showed up here today." Another woman raised her hand and said she had lost her faith years ago after her son died, and for the first time she felt like praying again. There, I understood. The pain I had gone through had found meaning. And in that simple room, with worn chairs and soft light coming through the windows, the sky touched the earth. Not because I spoke beautifully, but because I spoke truthfully. Not everyone cried. Not everyone believed. In fact, the more I told my story, the more I noticed the uncomfortable silence from some familiar faces. My neighbor, Mrs. Carroll, with whom I had shared coffee for decades, called me to the gate one day. She wanted to talk. "Margaret, are you okay? Do you really think you saw Jesus?" I replied calmly, "I don't think so. I know I saw it." She forced a smile, but her eyes held doubt and a little fear. I tried not to take it personally. After all, that's how I would have reacted if I hadn't gone through all that. But the real test came with my old university classmates. I was invited to a dinner with the old biology department. They were old friends, intelligent, cultured, kind-hearted people. But like me before, skeptical to the core. During dinner, someone commented on my appearances at church meetings. They laughed lightly. One of them, with a glass of wine in his hand, said, "Margaret, you've always been brilliant. How did you fall for this spiritual vision talk? You've had a cardiac arrest. Hallucinations are common." I could have argued. I could have cited studies on near-death experiences, neurology, metaphysics. But I didn't. I looked into his eyes and said, "You can believe whatever you want. But when you're alone, afraid, wondering if life has meaning, remember what I said here today. Because in that moment, you'll understand that there is more, much more." The silence that followed was more eloquent than any scientific argument. I didn't get applause. I wasn't turned into a heroine. But I left there with my heart at peace. The truth is that bearing witness to something sacred in a skeptical world is an invisible burden, but it is also an honor. Jesus didn't promise me acceptance. He gave me a mission, and even if the whole world laughed, I would keep talking, because what I saw, no one can take away from me. Today, I write these words sitting in the same chair where I spent so many skeptical mornings, reading the newspaper, drinking coffee, and thinking that life was just this: being born, growing up, working, getting old, and fading away. But now I know, life doesn't end here. It just begins. The experience I had was not just a miracle, it was a mercy, a chance to come back and say to anyone who will listen, Jesus is real. His love is real, and He is closer than you think. It doesn't matter if you are religious or not, whether you believe or not. What I saw goes far beyond doctrines, church signs, or theological discussions. It's about something that touches the deepest part of the human soul, the longing for meaning, for belonging, for eternity. Death is not the end, but life needs to be lived well before it arrives. Today, everything I do is with more purpose. A hug from me is longer. A look from me carries more truth. And I love you is now said with intention, because I know that one day I will be back in that light. And when I stand before Him again, I want to be able to say, Lord, I did what you asked. I told you. I did not keep quiet. This story is not just mine. It's yours too. Because maybe you are watching this video now not by chance, but because someone up there wanted to remind you that there is still time. If you feel like you've been living on autopilot, if you've lost faith, if you've moved away from God, or if you've never believed in anything, it's not too late. As long as there is breath, there is a chance to start over. And if you've made it this far, maybe this is your time. Time to open your heart, time to stop running away, time to say, I want to know you. If this story touched you, share it. Maybe someone right now needs to hear exactly this. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave your comment. I read each one. And who knows, you might also have a story to tell. My name is Margaret Collins, and I died. But I came back to say that the love of Jesus is more real than anything you can see.